The lights were brighter than the sun. Thousands of people filled the arena, their voices rolling through the building like thunder. Cameras stood at every angle, ready to capture the smallest movement of the most famous man in the room. And at the center of it all stood Elvis Presley. He wore a dazzling white jumpsuit covered in rhinestones that flashed beneath the stage lights. His dark hair was perfectly styled. His famous sideburns framed a face that millions of people recognized instantly. To the audience, he looked invincible. To the cameras, he looked like Elvis. But beneath the smile, beneath the famous white suit, beneath the applause, there was a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. That night, nobody knew just how close he was to breaking. The television special had been advertised for weeks. It was supposed to be an unforgettable evening of music, celebrities, and inspirational stories. Elvis had agreed to participate because the producers wanted one special moment near the end of the program. A young boy named Tommy was going to meet him. Tommy was 7 years old. He was small for his age, pale, and completely bald. He sat quietly in a wheelchair backstage, wearing an oversized black suit and a tiny tie that his mother had carefully straightened 3 times. She knelt beside him. "Are you nervous?" Tommy nodded. "A little." His mother smiled. "You don't have to be nervous." Tommy looked toward the curtain separating them from the roaring audience. "I've never met Elvis before." His mother squeezed his hand. "I know." Tommy looked down at the small piece of paper resting in his lap. On it was a red heart. Nothing more. Just a child's drawing of a heart. His mother noticed it. "You're still going to give him that?" Tommy nodded. "I made it for him." She smiled. "What are you going to say?" Tommy didn't answer immediately. Then he whispered, "I think he needs it." His mother stared at him. "Needs what?" Tommy looked at the heart. "A reminder." Before she could ask another question, a stage assistant appeared. "Tommy, they're ready for you." His mother immediately became serious. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. "Remember, you don't have to say anything you don't want to say." Tommy nodded. Then he looked toward the curtain. "I want to." The assistant pushed his wheelchair toward the stage. And nobody backstage realized that the 7-year-old boy was about to say something that would completely change the mood of the entire broadcast. The show began with music. The audience screamed when Elvis walked onto the stage. Elvis. Thousands of voices shouted his name. He smiled. He waved. He raised one hand. The building exploded with applause. Elvis had seen that reaction countless times. But tonight, something felt different. He could feel the cameras following him. He could feel the enormous expectations. He could feel the weight of being Elvis Presley. The host welcomed him warmly. Then came the introduction. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a very special guest. He's only 7 years old, but he's already faced challenges that most adults could never imagine." The applause became quieter. Elvis turned toward the entrance. The stage lights softened. And then Tommy appeared. A little boy in a black suit, sitting in a wheelchair. The audience immediately began clapping. Tommy looked overwhelmed. Elvis watched him carefully. Then something changed in Elvis's expression. The superstar disappeared for a moment. The performer disappeared. He simply looked like a man seeing a child who needed kindness. Elvis walked toward him. He crouched down. "Hey there, young man." Tommy smiled nervously. "Hi, Elvis." The audience laughed softly. Elvis smiled. You know my name already. Tommy nodded. Everybody knows your name. Elvis laughed. Well, that's dangerous. The audience laughed again. The tension disappeared. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. Elvis reached out his hand. Tommy took it. The boy's hand was incredibly small. Elvis looked down at it. Then he looked back at Tommy. You doing okay? Tommy nodded. Yes. You sure? Yes. Elvis smiled. Good. The host stepped forward. Tommy has been a great admirer of yours. Elvis nodded. I appreciate that. He says your music has helped him through some very difficult days. Elvis's smile softened. Is that right? Tommy nodded. Elvis looked at him. What's your favorite song? Tommy thought for a moment. Then he said, That's not why I wanted to meet you. The audience became silent. Elvis raised an eyebrow. No. Tommy shook his head. No. Elvis smiled. Well, now you've got my attention. Tommy reached into his jacket. He pulled out the folded piece of paper. The heart. He handed it to Elvis. Elvis opened it. He stared at the drawing. A red heart. Nothing complicated. Nothing expensive. Nothing that belonged on a television show. Just something made by a child. Elvis looked at Tommy. Did you make this? Yes. For me? Yes. Elvis smiled. Thank you. He placed one hand over his heart. That means a lot. But Tommy wasn't finished. He looked directly into Elvis's eyes and said, I heard you're tired. The smile on Elvis's face disappeared. The audience became completely still. Even the host looked surprised. Elvis blinked. Who told you that? Tommy shrugged. Nobody. Elvis slowly lowered himself closer to the boy. Then how'd you know? Tommy looked at the heart in Elvis's hand. Because sometimes people smile when they're tired. For the first time that night, Elvis didn't know what to say. He stared at the boy. The cameras kept rolling. Thousands of people were watching. And Elvis Presley, the man who could command an arena with one movement, suddenly found himself speechless. Quick question for everyone, WATCHING. If you were sitting in that audience and heard a 7-year-old say that to Elvis, what would you do? Would you stay silent and let him continue, or would you applaud? Comment below and tell us your answer. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. We want to know how far this story has traveled. Elvis slowly looked down at the little drawing. The red heart was slightly crooked. One side was larger than the other. There were pencil marks around the edges where Tommy had erased something and drawn it again. It wasn't perfect, but somehow that made it more powerful. Elvis turned it over. On the back, there were 7 words written in uneven handwriting. Everybody needs somebody to remind them. Elvis read the sentence twice. Then he looked at Tommy. What does that mean? Tommy answered quietly. It means you shouldn't forget. Forget what? Tommy looked toward the audience. Then back at Elvis. That people love you. Elvis swallowed. The camera moved closer. For a moment, nobody in the arena made a sound. Then Elvis asked, Do you think people love me? Tommy looked almost confused. Yes. Why? Because they came here. Elvis smiled faintly. That doesn't always mean people love you. Tommy thought about it. Then he said something that made Elvis's expression change again. Maybe they love Elvis. He paused. But I think you need somebody to love you when you're not Elvis. The words landed like a punch. Elvis looked away. He rubbed his face. The audience could see that something was happening. The host took one step forward. But Elvis lifted his hand. It's okay. His voice was quieter now. Just give me a second. He turned away from the cameras. The crowd remained silent. Elvis stood there holding a 7-year-old's drawing of a red heart. For years, millions had asked Elvis for something. An autograph, a photograph, a song, a kiss, a piece of clothing, a moment. But this little boy had come to give him something instead. Something Elvis hadn't realized he needed. A reminder that behind the name, behind the fame, behind the white jumpsuits and flashing lights, there was still a human being. Elvis turned back toward Tommy. You know something? Tommy shook his head. I've met a lot of people. Tommy smiled. I know. Elvis laughed quietly. You're pretty confident. Tommy nodded. A little. Elvis laughed again. But this time, his eyes were wet. He reached out and gently touched Tommy's shoulder. You know what? What? I think you're braver than me. Tommy immediately shook his head. No. Elvis smiled. Yes. No. Yes. Tommy looked at him. I'm scared all the time. Elvis's smile disappeared. What are you scared of? Tommy looked down at his hands. Not getting better. The entire audience seemed to hold its breath. Elvis didn't respond immediately. Then he moved closer. He placed his hand over Tommy's. You know what I learned? Tommy looked up. What? Being scared doesn't mean you're weak. Tommy listened. It means you're human. Tommy smiled. Elvis squeezed his hand. And humans need each other. Tommy nodded. Then came the question nobody expected. Do you have somebody? Elvis stared at him. Somebody. Somebody who reminds you. Elvis's eyes moved toward the floor. He didn't answer. The host looked uncomfortable. The cameras continued rolling. Tommy waited. Finally, Elvis whispered. Sometimes. Tommy shook his head. That's not enough. A few people in the audience laughed nervously. But Elvis didn't. He looked directly at the boy. And for the first time that evening, his eyes filled with tears. One tear rolled down his cheek. Then another. Elvis quickly wiped them away. But it was too late. The cameras had caught it. The audience had seen it. The world had seen it. Elvis Presley was crying. Not because of a song. Not because of a performance. Not because of a standing ovation. He was crying because a 7-year-old child had looked past the legend and seen the man. Elvis lowered his head. Tommy reached out. He touched Elvis's hand. It's okay. Elvis laughed through his tears. No, young man. He looked at him. I think it is. And then Tommy said the words Elvis would remember for the rest of his life. You spend your whole life making everybody feel better. Maybe tonight somebody should make you feel better. Elvis closed his eyes. The audience erupted in applause. But Elvis didn't stand. He remained beside Tommy, holding the tiny heart and crying. Because for the first time in a very long time, Elvis Presley didn't feel like the man everyone expected him to be. He simply felt human. And the night was only beginning. Elvis remained on one knee beside Tommy. The audience was still applauding, but the sound had changed. It wasn't the wild screaming that usually followed an Elvis Presley performance. This was different. It was softer, almost protective. People weren't cheering for the superstar anymore. They were cheering for the moment. Elvis slowly wiped his face with the back of his hand. Then he looked at the little boy beside him. "You know," Elvis said quietly, "you really know how to get a man in trouble." Tommy smiled. "I didn't mean to make you cry." Elvis shook his head. "You didn't." He paused. "You just made me remember something." "What?" Elvis looked toward the audience. "That I'm not supposed to be strong every second." Tommy nodded as though he already knew. "Everybody needs a break." Elvis smiled. "Yeah." He looked at the drawing again. The little red heart. He folded it carefully and placed it inside his jacket. Right over his heart. The crowd saw what he had done. A huge wave of applause filled the arena. But Elvis didn't immediately stand. Instead, he asked Tommy something. "Can I ask you a question?" Tommy nodded. "Why did you really want to meet me?" Tommy looked at his mother in the audience. She was crying. Then he looked back at Elvis. "Because when I was sick, Mom played your records." Elvis listened carefully. "She said your voice made the room feel less scary." Elvis lowered his eyes. Tommy continued. "When I couldn't sleep, she played your songs." He took a breath. "And when I thought I wasn't going to make it." He stopped. His mother covered her mouth. Elvis's face became serious. Tommy continued. "I heard you singing." Elvis leaned closer. "What did you hear?" Tommy smiled. "I heard somebody who sounded like he believed tomorrow would come." Elvis stared at him. That sentence hit him harder than anything else. Because Elvis had spent years standing beneath lights telling other people to believe. Believe in love. Believe in hope. Believe in tomorrow. But somewhere along the way, he had forgotten how to believe it himself. The host finally stepped forward. "Tommy, you wanted to tell Elvis something else tonight, didn't you?" Tommy nodded. Elvis looked curious. "What is it?" Tommy hesitated. Then he said, "I know people think you're the one who makes miracles happen." Elvis smiled. "I don't know about miracles." Tommy shook his head. "You do." The audience became quiet again. Tommy pointed toward the crowd. "You make them forget they're hurting." Elvis looked around. Thousands of faces stared back at him. People smiling. People crying. People holding hands. Tommy continued. "But I think you forgot something." Elvis raised an eyebrow. "What?" "That you can hurt too." Elvis's eyes filled with tears again. He looked down. For a few seconds, he couldn't speak. Then he whispered, "Yeah." The host slowly stepped back. The cameras stayed on Elvis. No music played. No orchestra. No dramatic sound effect. Just silence. And that silence said more than any song could have. Stop for a second and answer this. If someone gave you a reminder like Tommy gave Elvis, would you keep it forever? Write yes in the comments if you would. And tell us where you're watching from, your city or country. Don't forget to like this story and subscribe if you want more emotional stories like this. Elvis finally stood. But before he moved away, he leaned down and whispered something to Tommy. Nobody heard it. The microphone didn't catch it. Tommy smiled. Then Elvis walked toward the center of the stage. The audience applauded. But Elvis raised one hand. The applause faded. He looked directly into the camera. And he spoke. "I've been lucky." His voice was calm. "I've had opportunities most people could only dream about." He paused. "I've stood on stages in front of thousands of people." Another pause. "I've heard people scream my name." The audience smiled. But sometimes, Elvis looked down. You can be surrounded by thousands of people and still feel alone. The arena became silent. He continued, "I think a lot of people understand that." There were tears in the audience now. Elvis took a breath. "Maybe that's why this little man found me tonight." Tommy laughed. Elvis smiled. "And maybe I needed him more than he needed me." The audience erupted. Tommy's mother cried openly. Elvis turned toward Tommy. "Are you ready?" Tommy looked confused. "For what?" Elvis smiled. "To sing." Tommy's eyes widened. "Me? Yeah. I can't sing." Elvis laughed. "Neither can I." The audience laughed. Elvis walked over to him. "You don't have to sing perfectly." Tommy shook his head. "I don't know the words." Elvis smiled. "Then we'll make our own." The orchestra members looked at each other. Elvis gave them a subtle signal. The piano began. Softly, slowly, Elvis started singing. His voice was gentle. Nothing like the powerful performances people were accustomed to hearing. This was quieter, more intimate. Tommy listened. Then Elvis held out the microphone. "Your turn." Tommy shook his head. Elvis smiled. "Come on." Tommy whispered something into the microphone. "I love my mom." The crowd burst into laughter and applause. Elvis laughed too. "That's a pretty good song." Tommy smiled. Then Elvis said, "Tell her." Tommy looked toward his mother. "I love you, Mom." She broke down crying. The audience applauded. Elvis looked at Tommy. "See?" Tommy smiled. "You don't need a big voice." Elvis pointed toward his heart. "You just need something worth saying." Those words would later become one of the most remembered moments of the broadcast. But the emotional moment wasn't over. Not even close. As the music continued, Tommy suddenly reached into his jacket again. Elvis noticed. "What have you got now?" Tommy pulled out a small envelope. Elvis laughed. "Another surprise." Tommy nodded. "This one is from my mom." Elvis looked at Tommy's mother. She shook her head, embarrassed. "I didn't know he brought that." Tommy handed the envelope to Elvis. Elvis opened it. Inside was a photograph. It showed Tommy in a hospital bed. He looked much younger. Weak. Connected to medical equipment. Elvis stared at the picture. His smile disappeared. Tommy explained. "That was the day Mom thought I wouldn't make it." Elvis looked at the boy. Then back at the photograph. "How long ago?" Tommy answered. 2 years. Elvis looked shocked. "And you're still here?" Tommy smiled. "Yeah." Elvis nodded. "That's right." Tommy pointed at the photograph. "Mom played your songs that night." Elvis swallowed hard. He looked at Tommy's mother. She stood up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "I didn't know what else to do." Elvis nodded slowly. "You did enough." She shook her head. "No." Her voice trembled. "You did." Elvis stared at her. She continued, "Your music gave him something to hold on to." Elvis looked down. He seemed almost uncomfortable receiving the praise. "I just sang." Tommy's mother shook her head. "No, Elvis." She looked directly at him. "You gave him a reason to listen for tomorrow." Elvis's face tightened. He turned away. Again, the tears came. But this time, he didn't wipe them away. He let them fall. The audience was completely silent. Elvis walked back toward Tommy. He crouched beside him again. He held the photograph. Then he looked at Tommy. "You saved me tonight." Tommy shook his head. "No." Elvis smiled through his tears. "Yes." "No." "Yes." Tommy laughed. "You're stubborn." Elvis laughed. "I've been told that." Then Tommy became serious. "I didn't save you." Elvis waited. "I just reminded you." "Reminded me of what?" Tommy looked directly at him. "That you're loved." Elvis closed his eyes. His shoulders moved as he tried to control his emotions. Then he leaned forward and hugged Tommy. The audience erupted. Elvis held the little boy tightly. Not as a celebrity. Not as a performer. Not as the king. Just as a man hugging a child who had touched something deep inside him. Tommy's arms wrapped around Elvis's neck. For several seconds, neither moved. The cameras captured everything. And somewhere behind the cameras, even members of the production crew were crying. Then something unexpected happened. Elvis pulled away. He looked at Tommy. "I want to give you something." Tommy shook his head. "I don't need anything." Elvis smiled. "You're going to make this difficult, aren't you?" Tommy laughed. Elvis reached toward his neck. He removed a small necklace he had been wearing. The audience gasped. Elvis held it in his hand. "This belonged to me." Tommy stared at it. "I can't take that." "Yes, you can." "But it's yours." Elvis looked at him. "That's why I'm giving it to you." Tommy hesitated. Then he accepted it. Elvis carefully placed it around the boy's neck. The necklace rested against Tommy's black suit. Elvis adjusted it gently. "There." Tommy looked down. Then he smiled. "Now you have nothing to remind you." Elvis laughed softly. "Oh, I have something." He touched the folded heart inside his jacket. "I've got this." Tommy smiled. Elvis stood. Then he turned toward the audience. "I think this young man just taught me something." The crowd waited. Elvis looked toward Tommy. "Sometimes the person you think you're going to help." He paused. "Is the person who ends up helping you." The audience stood. A standing ovation filled the arena. Elvis looked overwhelmed. But this time, he didn't cry. He smiled. A real smile. The kind that didn't belong to Elvis Presley, the superstar. It belonged to the man underneath. And as the lights began to fade, Elvis leaned down one last time. He whispered into Tommy's ear, "Don't ever stop fighting." Tommy answered, "Don't you either." Elvis froze. He looked at the boy, then slowly nodded. "Deal." The lights went dark, but Elvis remained there for another moment, holding the little heart. And nobody in that arena knew yet that what happened backstage after the cameras stopped rolling would become even more emotional than what millions had just witnessed on television. Because Tommy had one final thing to tell Elvis. And this time, there would be no audience, no cameras, no applause, just two human beings sitting together in a quiet room. And a secret that would make Elvis cry all over again. The cameras had gone dark. The applause had disappeared. The enormous arena that had felt alive only minutes earlier was now almost empty. Most of the audience had already begun leaving. The stage crew moved quietly through the darkness, collecting microphones and cables. The orchestra members packed away their instruments. Television producers spoke in low voices about ratings, timing, and what they had just witnessed. But Elvis Presley wasn't thinking about any of that. He was backstage, sitting alone in a small dressing room. The white rhinestone suit still covered his body, but somehow he looked completely different now. The spotlight was gone. The smile was gone. The performance was over. And Elvis was staring at the tiny, red heart Tommy had drawn for him. He unfolded the paper. He read the words on the back again. Everybody needs somebody to remind them. Elvis slowly touched the paper with his fingertips. Then he heard a knock. He looked up. The door opened. Tommy's mother stood there. "I'm sorry to bother you." Elvis shook his head. "You're not bothering me." She hesitated. "Tommy wants to say goodbye." Elvis smiled. "Send him in." A few seconds later, Tommy appeared in his wheelchair. The necklace Elvis had given him hung around his neck. Elvis immediately smiled. "You're wearing it." Tommy nodded. "You gave it to me." "Well, I wasn't sure you'd actually keep it." Tommy looked at him seriously. "I don't give back gifts." Elvis laughed. "Good." Tommy rolled closer. Then he looked around the dressing room. "You look different here." Elvis raised an eyebrow. "Different?" "Yeah." "How?" Tommy thought for a moment. "You look tired." Elvis laughed softly. "That's because I am." Tommy smiled. "I told you." Elvis shook his head. "You did." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Tommy's mother quietly stepped outside and closed the door. Now there were only two people in the room. A world-famous singer and a 7-year-old boy who had somehow seen straight through him. Elvis leaned back in his chair. "So," he said, "you said you had one more thing to tell me." Tommy nodded. "I do." Elvis waited. Tommy reached into his pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. Elvis smiled. "Another heart." Tommy shook his head. "No." He handed it over. Elvis opened it. Inside was a child's drawing. It showed a man standing on a stage. Thousands of people surrounded him. But the man was alone in the middle. Above him was a giant heart. Elvis stared at it. Then he noticed something. The man in the drawing wasn't smiling. Elvis looked at Tommy. "Is that supposed to be me?" Tommy nodded. Elvis smiled. "You made me look pretty sad." Tommy answered honestly. "You were sad." Elvis looked down at the drawing. "How did you know?" Tommy shrugged. "I just knew." Elvis slowly folded the paper. Then Tommy said, "My mom told me something." "What?" "She said famous people don't get lonely." Elvis looked at him. "And what do you think?" Tommy shook his head. "I think everybody gets lonely." Elvis nodded. "That's probably true." Tommy moved closer. Even you. Elvis looked at the little boy. Especially me, sometimes. Tommy didn't seem surprised. Why? Elvis took a long breath. Because sometimes everybody wants something from you. He paused. They want you to smile. Another pause. They want you to perform. He looked at the floor. They want you to be strong. Tommy listened. And sometimes, Elvis's voice became quieter. Nobody asks what you want. Tommy stared at him. What do you want? The question was so simple. Yet Elvis couldn't answer. He looked toward the mirror. For a long moment, he studied his own reflection. Then he finally whispered, I don't know. Tommy nodded. That's okay. Elvis looked at him. Is it? Yes. Why? Because you can figure it out tomorrow. Elvis smiled. There it was again. That word. Tomorrow. The word Tommy had connected to his music. Elvis looked down. Maybe that's what I've been missing. What? Tomorrow. A quick question for you, WATCHING. Have you ever been surrounded by people and still felt completely alone? If you have, you're not alone. Comment I understand below and tell us what city or country you're watching from. And if this story is touching your heart, take a second to like the video and subscribe. You never know whose life might be changed by a story like this. Tommy looked at Elvis. I knew you'd understand. Elvis smiled. You're 7 years old. Tommy nodded. Yeah. And you're giving me life advice. Tommy shrugged. Maybe somebody has to. Elvis burst into laughter. It was the first time that night he had laughed without forcing it. The room suddenly felt lighter. Then Tommy asked, Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you like being Elvis? Elvis stopped smiling. He thought carefully. I love music. Tommy waited. I love performing. He looked at the little boy. But being Elvis. He paused. Sometimes it's hard. Tommy nodded. Because everybody expects you to be perfect. Elvis stared at him. How do you know that? Tommy pointed toward the television monitor. Because everybody was watching you. Elvis smiled. Yeah. Tommy looked down. I'm not perfect either. Elvis laughed. Good. Tommy looked offended. Why is that good? Because perfect people are boring. Tommy laughed. Then Elvis became serious. You know what? What? Don't ever let anybody make you think you're less valuable because you can't do something the way they do. Tommy looked at his wheelchair. Elvis noticed. Tommy didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Elvis understood. He leaned forward. You're not the chair. Tommy looked at him. You're not your illness. Tommy's eyes became watery. And you're not Elvis. The boy smiled. Elvis pointed toward him. That's right. Tommy smiled through his tears. I'm Tommy. Elvis nodded. Exactly. The room became silent. Then Tommy said, And you're just Elvis. Elvis smiled. Just Elvis. He repeated it softly, almost as though he was trying the words on for size. For years, he had been the king, the icon, the legend, the superstar. But in that little room, with no audience watching, he was simply Elvis. And somehow, that felt like freedom. A few minutes later, Tommy's mother returned. We should go. Tommy nodded. Elvis stood. He walked over and knelt beside the wheelchair. He looked at Tommy. I want you to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll keep fighting. Tommy smiled. I will. And promise me you'll keep drawing. Tommy laughed. Okay. And one more thing. What? Don't forget me. Tommy looked almost offended. I couldn't. Elvis smiled. Good. Tommy reached out and hugged him. Elvis closed his eyes. He held the boy tightly. Then Tommy whispered, Don't forget yourself. Elvis froze. He slowly pulled back. What did you say? Tommy repeated it. Don't forget yourself. Elvis stared at him. The words were simple, but they went deeper than anything anyone had said that night. Because Elvis had spent years becoming what everyone else wanted him to become. Maybe he had forgotten who he was before the lights, before the fame, before the screaming crowds, before the cameras, before the name became bigger than the man. Elvis touched Tommy's shoulder. I won't. Tommy smiled. Good. Then they said goodbye. Tommy's mother pushed the wheelchair toward the door. Before leaving, Tommy turned around. Elvis. Yes. You said you needed tomorrow. Elvis nodded. Tommy smiled. Then I'll see you tomorrow. Elvis smiled back. Yeah. Tomorrow. The door closed. Elvis stood alone. He looked at the little red heart inside his hand. Then he looked at himself in the mirror. For several seconds, he didn't recognize the man staring back. Then he smiled. Not the Elvis smile. His own. The next morning, Elvis arrived early. The television station was still quiet. He walked into the production office and asked, Where's Tommy? The producer looked surprised. You want to see him? Yes. He left last night. Elvis's face changed. Where's? The producer hesitated. He went back to the hospital. Elvis looked down. What hospital? The producer gave him the name. Elvis nodded. Then he turned around. I'm going there. The producer looked shocked. You can't just show up. Elvis stopped. Why not? Because you're Elvis Presley. Elvis looked at him. Then he reached into his jacket. He pulled out Tommy's little red heart. No, he said quietly. Today I'm just Elvis. One last question before we continue. If you were Elvis, would you visit Tommy at the hospital even if the cameras were gone and nobody would ever know? Type yes or no in the comments. And if you're watching from somewhere around the world, tell us your city or country. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The hospital was quiet. Elvis entered through a side entrance. No cameras. No reporters. No screaming fans. Just fluorescent lights and the smell of disinfectant. A nurse recognized him immediately. Her eyes widened. Mr. Presley. Elvis smiled. I'm looking for Tommy. The nurse checked the room number. Then she looked back at him. He's sleeping. Elvis nodded. I'll wait. You don't have to. I know. He sat down and waited. 30 minutes passed. Then an hour. Elvis didn't leave. Finally, the door opened. Tommy's mother stepped out. She stopped when she saw him. You came. Elvis stood. I said I'd see him tomorrow. She smiled through tears. He's going to be so happy. Elvis nodded. Then she hesitated. "There is something you should know." Elvis became serious. "What?" She looked toward the room. "Tommy doesn't know yet." "Know what?" She swallowed. "The doctors aren't sure how much time he has." Elvis didn't move. The hallway seemed to become completely silent. His face slowly changed. "What do you mean?" She looked down. "They don't know if the treatment is working." Elvis closed his eyes. The little red heart was still in his hand. He held it tightly. Then he whispered, "He told me he was going to see me tomorrow." His mother began crying. "He believes that." Elvis opened his eyes. "Then so do I." He walked into the room. Tommy was asleep. His face looked peaceful. The necklace Elvis had given him rested against his chest. Elvis pulled a chair beside the bed. He sat down. For the first time in years, Elvis Presley wasn't thinking about concerts. He wasn't thinking about money. He wasn't thinking about fame. He wasn't thinking about what people expected. He was thinking about one little boy, a 7-year-old who had walked onto a television stage carrying nothing but a crooked heart drawn on paper. A boy who had reminded a superstar that being loved was more important than being admired. Elvis reached over. He placed the red heart on the bedside table. Then he whispered, "You told me tomorrow would come." Tommy slowly opened his eyes. He smiled. "You came." Elvis smiled back. "I told you." Tommy looked at the heart. "You kept it." Elvis nodded. "I'm keeping it forever." Tommy closed his eyes again. "Good." Elvis leaned closer. "Get some rest." Tommy smiled. "Okay." Then, barely loud enough to hear, Tommy whispered, "Don't cry this time." Elvis laughed softly. "I'll try." Tommy fell asleep. Elvis remained beside him. And as he sat there in the quiet hospital room, he realized something. Millions of people had spent years calling him the king. But that night, one little boy had given him something far more valuable than a crown. He had given him a reason to keep going. And from that day forward, whenever Elvis stepped onto a stage and heard thousands of people screaming his name, he would remember a tiny red heart. He would remember a 7-year-old boy. And he would remember the words, "Don't forget yourself." Because sometimes the person you think you're saving is actually the person who saves you. And sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one powerful enough to remind a legend why he still has a tomorrow.